welcome to ScIQ. Today we've got some very interesting topics to discuss. Millennials and the internet, two of my favorite things. And with me I have Gabriella Mirabelli. She is not only the founder and CEO of Anatomy Media, but she is the host of the podcast called Up Next.
Yes. Hi, I'm so glad to be here.
Thanks for coming on. Now, you're somewhat of an expert on millennials, and I have some interesting data that I want to throw to you.
Okay.
But first of all, I want to ask, who are millennials?
Well, it's a really large cohort. It's enormous. It's the largest generation. And so when I look at millennials, I actually look at a subset of millennials. I'm looking at 18 to 24-year-olds, the younger millennials.
Young millennials. Now, I came across some data to suggest that millennials are scientifically needier than their older peers, and in particular, they're needier in the workplace. So they need more feedback when they're in their jobs compared to their older cohort that just want to kind of be left alone. And the data suggested that the reason why they were needier was because of the No Child Left Behind policy under the George Bush era, that these millennials have come through an education system that's constantly testing them and giving them feedback, and so then when they get to the workplace, they need that feedback as well. Do you agree?
No, not at all. Well, I mean, I think that could be a contributor, but I do not agree that it's the leading contributor at all. I really think that education and how the No Child Left Behind Act was implemented across school systems really was very different. So you have to look at larger environmental factors, and I would say things like entertainment and video games and things about attention span and feedback. If you're playing a video game, you're getting constant feedback, things like that. When we look at behaviors and we're analyzing what is this generation like for an employer, the data is interesting, but you have to be really careful about the inferences you draw. If you're looking at the macro level data, you know, this group of people need a lot of reinforcement. But the answer, how you deal with that as an employer, at the individual level, that's how you hire people. You hire them individually, one at a time. So that's micro level. And making inferences from one level to the next is a little dicey.
That all millennials.
Yeah, it also, some of those statistics I had read, and it was an older study probably than if you were reading just released data, but it was like 41% of them need feedback once a month. Which is like, well, first of all, I mean, on the one hand, everybody likes positive feedback. Who doesn't like positive feedback?
Exactly.
But, you know, if you're busy giving all this feedback, you know, it's not the raison d'etre of a job to nurture you. You know, that's not what the job is about. It's about the enterprise that you're working for. And so if you're hiring people and 41% of them need this feedback, why not look at the 59% who don't? Why not, you know, it's actually an issue of who you're selecting rather than who you need to retain.
Do you think this difference between like the young millennials that are coming into the workplace and the old managers, is that a millennials problem? Is it a manager's problem? Or is there some ground to meet in the middle?
I don't think it has to be a problem at all, actually. I really think it's a selection issue. And I think that it's a recruitment problem. If we're going to say it's a problem, if it becomes a problem in the workplace, if you have somebody who is you know, strolls into work and is like, so when do I get to do the creative stuff? You know, that kind of thing. And you're just like, well, I need you to do this task or this thing. And they're problematic, then you should fire them. That, you know, and so that there's a management issue if you're not firing people who aren't working out. And if you desperately want to retain people, why do you want to retain them? You know, what are they contributing so wonderfully? Then great. I mean,
It's so easy to have like one millennial in your life, like, you know, one child that you had or one 18-year-old that you had, and they're really needy, so all millennials must be needy, but it could just be that.
Well, I think on an individual level, yeah, and you look at them, this group of people, and you may have certain trends and certain behaviors, and that can be true as a group. And if I'm doing research on young millennials and I'm talking to entertainment brands about how people are consuming media, it's useful because it's a massive, they're not interested in just one. They're interested in, by and large, what people are doing. But if I'm employing people and I'm selecting people, I know what I want in an employee, and there are certain qualifications and things that are specific to my company, and I search for those things. And if the person isn't working out, I let them go. Yeah. And I don't think that that's an issue. There are wonderful millennials who are motivated and self-directed. And if you have someone who's not, sometimes it's a matter of they just haven't grown up. They haven't gotten the opportunity, and maybe the best thing you can do for that person is to let them go.
Yeah.
And it's not, I mean, what I think is a mistake is when we try to then turn the workplace into the helicopter parent.
Yeah.
That they never grow out of it.
Yeah, they're constantly going to be millennials even when they're 45.
Well, yeah. Oh, God. That's horrible.
I heard you mention brands, and I know you work with brands. So I want to know, what is the impact of, now that we've got this huge high turnover, like young people are changing jobs a lot faster than, say, my grandparents did. They would normally stay in one career rather than moving through the different brands that are available to them, or workplaces available to them. So they're moving on from different companies, and we have the rise of the internet. So it's really easy to say, I worked at this place and they were awful. So what's the impact of social media and perception of coming from employees when it comes to the impact on a brand's reputation?
Something a lot of people talk about in consumer products. And I think that, again, as an employee, you can be a brand advocate, you can talk about the brand, you can believe in the brand, but how you feel, you know, a lot of times we talk about brand stories and whether or not people want to consume those. Those stories, whether or not somebody wants and identifies with the story, has to do with the authenticity of the story, and if it speaks to them, and if it feels like a commercial, it's not going to wash. And so sure, if you're an employee and you then, the strength of weak ties, I tell you something about this company, you're going to believe it from me much more than you believe whatever press is out there. And so in that sense, it informs your opinion. However, how many touch points are you purchasing that brand? I mean, how many people do you know who work at Coca-Cola?
None.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's not affecting the vast number of consumer products brands you don't have people working for who are in your life. And so then you're talking about business to business companies. And so what's the impact of the worker experience? You know, you have an opinion about McKinsey Consulting. Yeah. Are you hiring McKinsey? You know, you think, you know, I mean, so it depends what we're talking about.
Good answer. It depends. It's always a good answer in science. Moving on from millennials, I want to talk about the internet. And there's been a lot of development, both in the technology behind the internet and innovation, but also in the law. Now we've had a change of presidency, and with that has come a new approach to privacy and net neutrality. So a survey was just released that said 87% of people are really worried about managing their personal online data. And there's more data that we're putting online than ever before. So managing it is an issue. How is that affecting brands and consumers and the relationship?
Well, I think what you see is people are aware that this is of concern. And so you had Comcast say, we're not selling any of our data. You know, I think, and then I saw that popping up on social media. They're not selling it, they're not selling it. The thing to remember is they're not selling it, but they're using it for their own purposes, you know, and their own data collection. The other thing is, it's already happened. That horse is so far out of the barn. They know so much about you. It's already the way it is.
So they're saying, like, I'm not selling this, but they're using it for
internally. Internally, they're using it for their own purposes, and they may not be selling it to a third party. So they're telling you the truth. They're not selling it, but they can still use it.
Yeah, and that people that they would a use might be.
A use might be a use might be yes. If we can programmatically place an advertisement, which is, but that might not be a fine thing because advertising is acceptable as long as it's relevant. You don't want to see the old age, you know, toe fungus ad or whatever, you know, and so
YouTube, I always get really annoyed when, like, sometimes I'll look at one thing that I want to buy online and then I start seeing ads for that thing everywhere, and I kind of get annoyed that you can see what I'm doing and I don't have any privacy.
It's creepy. Yeah. It's absolutely creepy. And I think one of the things that's kind of interesting is what we're seeing with young millennials and then the generation slightly right immediately below that is they're actively managing their social presence in a way that older generations are not. You see a lot of lurking, you know, that they exist, but they don't necessarily post as much because they're more aware, they're more savvy about it.
Natives, they've grown up with
They've grown up with it. I mean, I think that we're going to see when the Internet of Things starts really plugging in. I mean, talk about creepy. You know, that's really where they're listening.
Yeah.
And everybody loves it. Yeah,
Yeah.
you know, people love talking and saying, Siri, do this, or, you know, the Amazon Echo.
I want to get the Echo. I want to put one in my house, but the idea of like someone, you know, I always think like the robot apocalypse is going to come and I'm going to be first to go because I've got the Amazon Echo in my house.
Well, this is the thing. Whenever I interview folks on my podcast, I then at the very end, well, I think, yeah, I asked you the questions, you know, what do you think about AI? And the various answers is really interesting. You know, is it fantastic, it's the future, or it's already happening, or it's genocide bingo, you know, they're going to kill us all. No, no, you shouldn't.
So when you say that people are concerned about their privacy, I know for me, I find the ads a little creepy, but then when I do get that ad for like old age foot fungus cream, I'm like, why didn't they know me better? So do you think that generally people do want targeted ads, or do you think that people would prefer their privacy and get served YouTube ads in Spanish?
Well, I think it's the level of if it's useful. I mean, I think it varies by person, and I think it would be great to be able to opt out. I mean, that's sort of my personal.
So click a button and
say I don't want to be tracked, or I don't want this. It's going to annoy me. However, if the ads can be served up that are useful, are relevant, then they are less invasive. They speak to who you are, and that might be okay.
Wouldn't that be nice if you could just click a button and say, look, don't.
Well, you know, you can in one sense. Well, no, I mean, you can in that you can have ad blockers. And this is another thing. Millennials, 2/3 of them use ad blockers. That's a much higher adoption rate than you have with older generations. And when we looked at why people got the ad blockers, it was to, you know, they're consuming video content and they don't want the ads. And actually, we didn't prove causality, but there was a high correlation, and it was a synergistic relationship between piracy and ad blocking.
Wow.
You're pirating content, lots of pop-up ads, want to get rid of the pop-up ads, so I'm going to get an ad blocker. Ooh, it's such a nice experience. And then you say, hey, Mom, you know, if you get this thing, it would be so much nicer. And then you're stripping out a lot of the ads.
Irrelevant to ads and piracy, I'm so glad someone knows the difference between causality and correlation. That's amazing. So do you think that we're heading into a time when pirating is going to be more of an issue, that people are not going to find a way around advertising, or is advertising here to stay?
Well, I think that we're seeing a real change. I mean, in that advertising has to up its game. It's content like everything else. And so the ad has to be just more interesting. There isn't a demand for an ad unless it's interesting. People watch the Super Bowl and watch those ads. It's possible to make really entertaining ads that you want to watch again, ads you want to share, ads that speak to you, but that's not what we're seeing a lot of. And why are people ad blocking? They're ad blocking because they don't want to see the stuff. It's repetitive, it's off point, it's just too much. So what we also see are people looking at other models, other consumption models. I mean, certainly in media, you know, Netflix. You get used to watching your programs without interruptions, and it's kind of a nice experience. And if user experience drives everything, every business, everything is all about the user experience, my experience is nicer if I don't have ads. And then
Netflix or YouTube Red.
Right.
For this channel, we've seen a huge increase in the amount of people who are watching this show through YouTube Red, which means they're paying money for it, but they're not seeing any ads.
Right, exactly. And so what you have then are these, you know, other ways, other revenue models, other ways of getting that revenue. I mean, the thing with the internet, the ethos was free, and that has to do with how the internet evolved. And initially it was impossible. It could not take payment. It wasn't designed to take payment. And so by definition, everything had to be free. And then it took a while to develop the encryption for credit cards, but you still couldn't do micropayments, which really, when you're talking, I'm just going to watch a YouTube video, I don't want to pay, like it's a fraction of a penny, or, you know, a fraction of a thing. What you're going to see, I think, though, is with blockchain technology, you're going to see the ability to have micropayments, cryptocurrency, and that's going to be the sort of next big shift.
Tell me more about blockchain, because I want to talk about innovation, and that's one of the biggest.
It's huge. I think the combination of blockchain and the Internet of Things, it's going to be sort of Internet 2.0. Things are going to completely change.
I want to talk about innovation and in the internet, and particularly you mentioned that you know, there's all these new technologies like blockchain coming through, but one that I'm really excited about is artificial intelligence.
Okay.
And there's this huge drive now for things like virtual reality, augmented reality, and especially when it comes to experiences. So
Right.
Pokemon Go was a huge deal,
Right.
and a huge success story. How is virtual reality and augmented reality affecting the user experience? How is it impacting brands when they're trying to advertise to us?
Well, I think it's still very nascent. I think that you have that whole enthusiasm gap between the level of enthusiasm and interest and the actual performance of it. The problem currently is you have to wear this headgear, or you're dealing through a phone on, you know, Google Cardboard, or well, that actually, the augmented reality is probably going to work faster because you can do it, and it's still very two-dimensional, where you're really having an experience, a 3D, you're immersed in it. The technology, the headgear is a challenge because, you know, we had 3D television, and one of the objections people had was the glasses. Now those glasses are nothing compared to the huge headgear you have. And you also have something where right now when people are watching television, they're watching television and they have their phone and they have their laptop and they have their tablet.
Screens.
So they have multiple screens. And so if you're going to really occlude yourself, you've really got to want to do what that thing is. You know, so it's a willingness. I think it's a challenge for the target group that they want, this young millennial group. It's going to be an experience like going to an amusement park ride, where you're really, you know, in that experience. But it's until the glasses and headgear becomes much less bulky, I don't think you're going to have a long time. I mean, there's a company that uses virtual reality to train professional athletes. Wow. And because you can, you know, see it and you can practice, right? You're practicing your shot. Those people who are highly motivated, you know, highly motivated, they want to stay in that. The longer they're in it, the better they're going to get. Like 10 minutes, then they want out.
Really?
Yeah. So, you know, being in there for long periods of time, you know, I don't think people really know quite how it's going to work. The technology, the viewing technology hasn't really come there yet. I think it's going to be there eventually. And I think that what you really have is an empathy. I think it is going to be wonderful for creating empathy and connection for people, you know, looking at sort of for news or history and learning about.
Because you can delve into
Well, because you can look around. I mean, from a storytelling point of view, you've got, because the director becomes the viewer in the experience, you have to really work with sound to cue where the person is going to look in the field if they're in this alternate reality.
Wow, I love how it's come full circle. So everyone got so distracted, they've got the television and their phones and their laptops together, and then virtual reality comes along and we love that intensity of experience, but we're too distracted with all the screens to be able to enjoy the intense experience. So there's two kind of trends that are conflicting with each other.
Well, yeah, and it's also the occlusion that you're going to separate from everybody.
Yeah,
you know.
Don't do that well, the young people.
Well, no, but they don't actually. What's strange is they don't separate, but they also don't actually get person to person either. They prefer to communicate over text, which is so inauthentic and one remove, because you can really think about what you're going to text the person. You can be the very best version of yourself, you know. And
I know I am.
of course. Who isn't?
Well, thank you so much for joining us, Gabriella. If people want to check out more about your views on technology or what's coming up next in the future of communications, where can they find you?
Well, they can find me on LinkedIn. I post daily there, and also on my podcast website.
Check out Gabriella's podcast. I've been on it, so you know it's going to be amazing.
Awesome.
Thanks for joining us on ScIQ. See you next time.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Jayde Lovell, resident science nerd on the Young Turks network. You're watching ScIQ, and we know you don't want to miss an episode, so please click the subscribe button down below.